Mhm. Hi all, we're just waiting for a couple more people to come in and then we'll launch in. All right, Henry, I can't see the number of participants. How are we looking? Looks like, 48. I think we should get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Cooper Ulrich. I'm a staff attorney with the Georgia Justice Project, and we're here today in partnership with Stonecrest Municipal Court to talk with y'all about reentry and recent changes to Georgia law, and hopefully helping support you in figuring out how to get your criminal record restricted and sealed. I'm joined by my co-presenter, Jenny Hurwitz, who is also a staff attorney here. Jenny, do you want to?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I look forward to talking to y'all as well.
And then I'm also joined, I'll finish with the GJP folks, save the best for last. Henry Wilkerson is also going to be supporting us in the Q&A box. We will ask, first of all, let you know that this presentation is being recorded. So please do not put any personal information. One, you'll be able to refer back to it, which will be great. It'll be up on the website. But two, do not put any personal case information in the chat or anywhere else because you don't want the world to be seeing that. And then also, please put your questions in the Q&A box and not in the chat. We will be taking questions, a few points during the presentation. Also, Henry will be trying to answer your questions ongoing for those that are more logistical, and save some of the ones that everyone will benefit from. And I think that's it. And then I will give a final and very important thank you and shout out. I'm going to progress here to Clerk Mallory Miner, who's a municipal court administrator there in Stonecrest, who really helped facilitate and make this happen. So good afternoon, Mallory. You want to say anything?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all so much for being here. I'm sure that you all will find this information to be very informative. So thank you all again.
My understanding is that Chief Judge Curtis Miller may be joining us in a few minutes, and once we see him jump on, I will get to a logical stopping point and allow the Chief Judge to speak to y'all briefly. And then I just have here Georgia State Senator Tanya Anderson. I'm not sure if Senator Anderson is with us. She was going to join us when this was going to be in person, but I did want to just take a minute to shout her out with gratitude from GJP. She was instrumental in helping push legislation and get passed legislation that we're going to talk about here in this presentation to allow y'all to clear, restrict, and seal up to 2 misdemeanor convictions in the state of Georgia. Before that legislation that Senator Anderson helped get passed, there was no way, or very, very few ways to get a misdemeanor conviction restricted and sealed. So I just wanted to name her. She's her district is right over there by Stonecrest, and so we couldn't have done a lot of this work without her. So I'm going to launch in. Panelists, y'all can feel free to keep your cameras on or turn them off. It's totally up to you, but I wanted to give that permission. Nobody wants all their facial expressions watched. So here's a roadmap for today. We are the Georgia Justice Project. We've been around for, I guess, coming on almost 40 years now, a long time doing this work. I will tell you a little bit about who we are. Then we'll talk about understanding and cleaning up your criminal record, what that can look like, what options are available. Then we're going to shift gears. I'm going to hand the mic to Jenny, who's going to talk with you about felony probation reform. There's some options for anyone on this call who's on probation, who knows somebody who's on probation. There are some new laws that you should definitely know about, and ways to take advantage of those. Then reducing driver's license suspensions. There's the newest of the laws that we've helped to get passed. want to talk about that, and then voting. We will have, as I mentioned, opportunity for questions at the end. So the Georgia Justice Project, our goals in theory of change. Our goal is to reduce the number of Georgians under correctional control. Many of you may know that for a long time, Georgia has had more individuals on probation and parole than any other state in the country. So one of our primary goals and missions is to reduce that number. Also to reduce reentry barriers for people who used to be incarcerated or justice involved. Reentry meaning to employment, housing, getting an occupational license, things like that. We do that in 3 ways. The first is individual representation, so legal representation, social services, going into court with people and representing them on criminal cases and in record clearing. Second is policy and systemic work. So I mentioned Senator Anderson before. We partnered with her to help get the law passed to improve opportunities or create opportunities to restrict and seal misdemeanors. And we are constantly doing that legislative and policy work. We're working now to expand it beyond 2. We hope that we will not always be limited to 2 misdemeanors to be restricted and sealed, that it will be expanded. And then finally, community outreach, just what we're doing right now, talking to y'all. So here are all the places that we intervene in the process. So I guess on the outside, those boxes, I'll talk, we've had 21 laws changed on the policy front. So expanded expungement, impacting 1.5 million Georgians. Also early probation termination, which we're going to talk about, impacting 48,000 Georgians. Holistic criminal defense, which is just what criminal defense, just what it sounds like. So representing folks who are being charged or facing charges, criminal charges, in all different levels of court, misdemeanors and felony. Prison support and reentry. So folks who are we specifically work with the Metro Reentry Facility here in Atlanta to help folks who are coming out of being incarcerated, reentering the community, getting rid of their fines and fees, helping them terminate probation, and finally, record restriction and expungement. Okay, expanding access to record clearing. So as I know many of you know, a felony conviction specifically can cause very significant barriers to employment, housing, and education. Any criminal record can, but especially a felony. I have a note here that there are 49,000 plus collateral consequences and to a felony conviction. What that means are the different small ways that it can impact a person's ability to live their fullest life. Anything from being able to volunteer at your child's school to, there's just enormous ways that this can impact. So you are not alone. There are 4.6 million Georgians with a criminal history, which is a lot, and over 600,000 with a felony conviction. So if you're feeling like I'm the only person with this struggle, you are not. Let's talk about your Georgia criminal history and what you can do about it. Okay, here's some vocab words we'll say. Expungement is a word you're going to hear a lot when people talk about record clearing. It is what a lot of states call record clearing. Maybe you Googled, how do I expunge my criminal record? There is no true expungement in Georgia. The definition of an expungement is to destroy a record. It would be ripping it up, deleting it. It's like it never occurred. That doesn't happen in Georgia. In Georgia, under the Georgia law, clerks, law enforcement, and the courts will always see your criminal record. So there is no way for us or anybody else, don't give them your money if they tell you they can, to make it so that law enforcement won't see your criminal record. That's not possible under the law. What is possible, though, is restriction and sealing. And restriction and sealing controls who can see the record. So it's always there, but it's who can see it. And the way I like to explain restriction versus sealing is first to explain, in Georgia, if you have a record, there are 2 different places where your record is stored. One of them is a central place. So the federal government has the FBI, Georgia has the GBI, and that GBI collects all the records from around the state. They create a report called a GCIC. And that's coming from all the different courts. Say you got arrested in Macon and then you got arrested in Savannah. The GBI, the GCIC report, it's a state-held report, and it will keep all of your record from all over the state. That's one place your record's stored, is your GCIC. The other place is each individual courthouse has records. So some of them will put them online. Some of them just have them at the courthouse. And the reason that matters, we're going to come back to this. is that private background checks, some of y'all will recognize checker.com, backgroundchecks.com, private background check companies, they look at those court records. And so restriction and sealing, I'm going to keep my hand little like elementary school teacher motion here. Restriction deals with that GCIC, with that state housed record. It limits who can see it. So if an employer or housing provider says, go get your GCIC for us and bring it back, we want to see your record. If your record is restricted, they won't be able to see that particular case or cases. But it's a two-step process. So restriction handles that state record. Sealing handles the court record. Sealing is what will take those court records down offline, keep people from being able to walk into the courthouse and ask for a copy of your case file. And that's important for that reason, but especially because it's also what controls what private background check companies can see. So I like to spend a lot of time on this so that you understand you need both pieces. And the reason both pieces matter too is restriction you can do most of the time through just the clerk's office or a handwritten application to the GBI, to the GCIC folks. The sealing requires a court order. So that's where a lawyer usually comes in. Okay, pardons. This is just that many of y'all probably heard of presidents get pardons, right? But actually, almost 40% of the folks, plain old lay folks like y'all who have criminal records, felony records, apply for pardons in Georgia, they're granted. So pardon is a certificate of forgiveness by the state, usually for a felony, that says we forgive you. We'll come back in a little bit to why that matters. Ms. Minor, I see your name twice, which suggests maybe that we have the judge with us?
Well, I do not see our chief judge just yet.
Okay.
But I would like to acknowledge our two House representatives that are here with us today. So
Wonderful.
We do have Ms. Rhonda Taylor and Darshan Kendrick. So we appreciate you all being here with us today and ensuring that this information is getting out to everyone. So we appreciate you all for supporting us. And also I see a lot of our GMCCC clerks here with us today. So again, we appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mallory, for letting me know. And thank you, yes, to the representatives and also to all the clerk staff. It really does take a village. I know that's an expression for raising a kid, but this work, a lot of what we do is collaborating with clerks and court staff and working with y'all to make sure that we are helping support you. The law changes a lot, and making sure if you have questions, we're here as a resource. So please know that we are not just, we want to help you help our clients and support you in doing that and answer questions as we're able, or hear your frustrations if they arise. So anyway, okay, so pardons, we were just talking about pardons. That is a certificate of forgiveness from the state. And we're going to talk in a little bit about why that matters, but there's a recent law that allows you to restrict and seal pardoned cases, which means that would take a pardoned felony, remove it from view on your record on private background checks, which is a pretty big deal. So when a company or a housing provider is running your background check, that pardoned felony wouldn't show up. So that's a really powerful remedy. And then the last thing is first offender. Many of you know about first offender, probably you've heard about it, but there is something called, let me just say first offender is if you are sentenced and plead under first offender, it means that case is not a conviction. So whether a felony or a misdemeanor, there are some felonies that are not eligible, but that means that it does not go on your permanent criminal record as a conviction. So we'll come back to first offender and why that matters for record clearing. Okay, the big picture. What can you do to clean up your record in Georgia? Something that happens a lot when we have clients come through our intake processes, they want to dive into the details of the case. What happened? Who did it? Who didn't? Or what all the details were. And the one thing that's important for you to know is what happened in the underlying case, like the details, the facts of the case, don't impact your eligibility for record clearing at all. I'm going to say it again. What happened in the case doesn't matter in terms of whether you're eligible. So whether you felt like you shouldn't have pled guilty, or you should have, or you did, or you didn't. I've been a criminal defense attorney a long time. I know there are a lot of difficult circumstances that cause someone to take a plea or to be found guilty that might not feel just. And I believe you if that has happened. However, with record clearing, all we're looking at is how the case came out. Do you have a felony conviction? Do you have a misdemeanor conviction? Did you take a first offender plea that includes conditional discharge, or what some people call drug first offender? Do you have pending charges? Or is it a non-conviction, meaning there was a null pros, an acquittal, something like that? So that's what we're going to look for. When I look at a record, all I'm looking at is how did the case resolve? So we're going to go one by one with each of those. Let's talk about what can you do to clean up a felony conviction. The first thing is retroactive first offender. So we mentioned before, first offender is this incredible tool that allows you to take a plea and be sentenced, but not have a criminal conviction if you're successful with your sentence, right? That's an important piece. You have to complete your sentence successfully on probation. Retroactive first offender means, let's say you pled guilty to a case back in 2007. Nobody told you about first offender. You just didn't know. Maybe you didn't have a lawyer. Maybe the lawyer was so busy. Maybe they didn't think about it. Mistakes were made. Also, I think back then, a lot of folks weren't advising their clients about first offender, especially on misdemeanors. So if you took a plea back then on a misdemeanor or a felony, and you would have been eligible for first offender, but you were never told, you are eligible for first offender. So there are some excluded offenses, serious violent felonies and sex offenses, but this is probably the most powerful record clearing tool, because what it means is that I can have a felony conviction, maybe a theft conviction, 10-year-old theft conviction. I never was told about first offender and I should have been. And we can go back and help you, or a private attorney can go back and help advocate with the court for that to be converted into a non-conviction and restricted and sealed. So that would come off both your GCIC that is looked at by housing and employers, and also off of your private background check. The second option is a Survivor's First Act. I'm going to speak very briefly about this because it's a very detailed law, and it's also a very difficult subject matter, but I want to flag it in case it's something that might apply to you. It's a new law that allows you to vacate or restrict and seal a conviction if you are a victim or survivor of human or sex trafficking. I will just say that, those words are obviously very disturbing, upsetting. It's a very broadly, the law defines sex trafficking and human trafficking very broadly. So if there's anything that feels to you like coercion around sex or labor work, where there was an exchange of money or force, it would be worth bringing up in an intake with us or with your lawyer, because this is also a very powerful remedy. It completely vacates a conviction. And the last thing for a felony is, I mentioned before, if you get a pardon, which anyone can apply for a pardon. You don't need a lawyer to do that. You can apply directly, and you receive a pardon. You can restrict and seal that pardoned felony, and that would mean that it's removed off of your GCIC and pulled down off court websites and from private background checks. I do have a note here that you can apply for a pardon 5 years after you complete your sentence. So you have to have been off probation or parole or any other supervision for 5 years before you can apply for a pardon. I guess the last thing about that is there are some exceptions about what pardon felonies can be restricted and sealed, and they're the same list as the first offender list. So if you couldn't have gotten first offender, you can't have that pardoned felony restricted and sealed, but most are included. So it's definitely a powerful option. Okay, so who can apply for a pardon? You have to have been convicted of a felony. There are some misdemeanors that are included. So for example, family violence misdemeanors, if you have been completed your sentence over 5 years ago, you would be eligible to apply for a pardon. And there's some other misdemeanor circumstances. For example, you just need a lot of documentation. So we can drill into that another time, but mostly it's for felonies. You have to have completed your sentence at least 5 years ago or more. Also remember that non-reporting status doesn't mean your sentence is complete. You have to be completely off paper, as they say. That wait time can sometimes be waived, but it's pretty rare. You pretty much have to have a letter from an employer or housing provider that says, if they get a pardon, we will give them this job, and be able to hand that letter to the board. So you need some real detailed evidence there. You have to have lived a law-abiding life for 5 years. So you can't have any other convictions other than non-serious traffic offenses. Speeding, etc. You have to have paid all your fines and restitution. Fines just means is your sentence complete. So, sometimes if you're off probation, you should be good. And no open cases or pending charges. That includes dead dockets. So if you have a dead docketed case, you may not apply for a pardon until you resolve that dead docket. We'll talk a little bit about dead dockets. Doing on time here. Good. Okay, what can you do to clean up a misdemeanor conviction? I will go much more quickly here because you've already heard the first two. Retroactive first offender is the first option. Also, I'm just going to say, Mallory, please interrupt me when the judge is here, since I don't see him there, but just flag, wave or something, because I don't want to just keep talking while we should be introducing him. What was that? Did I will it into existence?
You did. You did.
Chief
Fantastic.
Chief Judge, hello. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you.
I just wanted to give you an opportunity to greet everybody, introduce yourself. I've already thanked you, but I will do so again. We're very grateful for y'all's invitation and opportunity to do this.
Yes, and yeah, welcome everybody. I'm so glad you all have taken the time to participate because these are some very, very important matters and they can affect so much in your life. And my experience as a practicing attorney as well as a judge is that people don't realize it until it's adversely affected you in some way. So your being on this call and educating yourself as to the various forms to recoup your life from a conviction of a crime is very important. It's information that the community population in general does not have. So you're informing yourself, finding the resources that are necessary to tell other people is fantastic. I do believe as a judge that the law should be accessible to everybody. You don't need to be a lawyer, even though we have a fine lawyer teaching you these things. And, so we just want to thank you. And it's our pleasure to host the Georgia Justice Project. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I really want to echo. I used to say this when I did public defense work, but I think it's as applicable or even more applicable now. I think I want to work myself out of a job. I hope that this becomes so folks know about this so much that they're doing so much advocacy for themselves, and we make these processes so accessible that you don't need me anymore, because this law exists for you. And we Georgians, I don't have a criminal record. I've never had a criminal record, but I want you working alongside me. I want you living in community. I want us to all be in community with each other. And so yeah, I just spread the word, spread this word. And I hope over time the law continues to expand, because I think we can even do more, which we're definitely advocating for that. So I'll keep going about what we can do to clean up a misdemeanor conviction, if that works for everybody. Sound good? Great. Okay, so misdemeanor convictions. The first remedy is the same as what we talked about with felonies, retroactive first offender. You can get it for a misdemeanor or a felony. You had to have been eligible at the time. So that means, for example, for a misdemeanor conviction, if you have a prior felony conviction, you can't use retroactive first offender on that misdemeanor. Once you have a felony, you're no longer eligible. But if you have just a misdemeanor conviction, or let's say a misdemeanor conviction that can't otherwise be cleared from your record, retro first offender is a great option. There are some excluded offenses, DUI, and some other excluded misdemeanors. Not many for retro first offender. Survivors first also applies to misdemeanors. And then finally, I shouted out Senator Tanya Anderson at the beginning. This here is the law that she was instrumental in helping us get passed. So it's relatively new, and it says that if you have completed your misdemeanor sentence and haven't been convicted of anything else in the last 4 years, you may restrict and seal that misdemeanor conviction, and you can do it for up to 2 misdemeanors. So that's in addition to retroactive first offender. So I'll give you an example. Someone has 1 felony conviction and 2 eligible misdemeanor convictions. We could get retroactive first offender for that felony conviction, restrict and seal that, and restrict and seal the 2 eligible misdemeanor convictions. When that background check is run by an employer or housing provider, it would come back no record. So obviously, if you're asked directly about a misdemeanor conviction, that restriction and sealing you do have to answer, but there are lots of jobs that don't ask. And so they're gonna, you will go through the process, get the job offer, then they'll run your background check and it will come back no record. So that it's really very powerful. Similar with a pardoned case, misdemeanor or felony, once it's restricted and sealed, that's not going to show up. Okay, for those misdemeanor, the SB 288 case, there's a couple big exceptions I want you to know about. Retro first offender is still available for these cases, but you cannot get these restricted and sealed under the misdemeanor law. Family violence cases, any family violence case is not eligible to be restricted and sealed under the SB 288 misdemeanor restriction and sealing. Likewise, this list here includes sexual battery, DUI, and a few theft cases. I will say theft by shoplifting is included, which means if you have 2 theft by shopliftings, we can restrict and seal those under the law. This slide right here is part of the work that we're doing right now to try to advocate for expanding the misdemeanor restriction and sealing. We do want it to be more than 2, and we would like, for example, for any theft to be included, but little by little. Okay, we're almost like about, let's see, a little more than a third of the way through. These are common issues that come up in record clearing, non-convictions. So non-convictions includes null process, first offenders that have been successfully completed, conditional discharge that have been successfully completed. You can restrict and seal any number of these. So if you got arrested, I hope you didn't, but if you got arrested 20 times and all 20 of those cases were dismissed, or you got first offender and conditional discharge, you can restrict and seal all 20 of those cases. So that's, one thing to really know, that however many dismissed cases you have on your record, you should absolutely work to get those restricted and sealed. You can do a lot of that on your own. Reaching out to our intake, we can kind of help y'all, support y'all on that. The second category are dead dockets. This doesn't happen as much in the outer counties, but Fulton County, they're pretty common, and there are some other places that use them. This means it's like putting your case on a shelf. So it doesn't fully close the case. It doesn't resolve. You don't get a conviction, but it's also not dismissed. It sets it over here and says, we're not going to do anything with this for a while. What should happen ideally is over time, there's a process where that case gets resolved, either dismissed or the person's called back into court, but sometimes they just linger. And if you have a dead docketed case, the reason that matters is you can't apply for a pardon, and sometimes it'll show up as an open case on a private background check. So if you have a dead docket, or maybe sometimes this will happen, people will realize this happens because a case will come up and they're like, wait, I resolved that case, that 1997 case. Why is it showing up here? You may have a dead docket. So the first thing I would do is go to that court clerk and ask, what is the status of this case? See if you can get a disposition or a document showing what the status of the case is. And if it is a dead docket, you have 2 options. One, if it's over 12 months old, you can ask for it to be restricted and sealed so it won't show up anymore. And the other option is if it's a pretty old case, especially misdemeanors, I would encourage you to reach out to an attorney or to us or to get support for requesting that it be dismissed and the record be restricted and sealed. Corrections, we do see errors on GCIC. Believe it or not, the humans that work for the state of Georgia make mistakes too. And so sometimes something will be entered as a felony when it was really a misdemeanor, or maybe you got first offender, but the first offender isn't showing up, and that can cause a real problem. So before you panic or tell anybody off, because I know this is such, this impacts people's lives in a very real way. It can create a lot of very real feelings that need to be expressed. I would recommend seeing if you can get a copy of that. We'll tell you at the end how to do this. Get a copy of your GCIC to look and see, make sure it's showing up correctly. And then last common issue is active supervision, probation, and parole. You cannot apply, if you're serving a sentence, you cannot apply for restriction and sealing or record clearing remedies. We will talk a little bit later about what you can do while you're on probation or parole, but that's a big one. Okay, we're going to shift to Know Your Rights. I'm going to blow through Know Your Rights pretty quickly. And I'm going to take a quick break for any questions about what I just talked about. Henry, I'm going to defer to you. Like maybe let's say 3 questions, if there are any that jump out to you.
Yeah, so conveniently, we have 3 questions right now. So the first one, this we may cover later, but are there any programs to help people pay fines regarding felony or misdemeanor convictions, or an alternative for longer probation with less probation fines?
I'm actually going to say that this is outside the scope of my knowledge. Jenny, do you maybe at the end when we're talking about probation, I make a
I-
note, or
I
you want us to
definitely
jump in?
think that, yes, we'll be addressing at least part of the question during the probation presentation. So if you can hold off a bit, we'll definitely get to that later.
That's great. Okay. I like to say I don't know when I don't know, because we all get into trouble when we don't do that. Henry, question 2.
And then, okay, yeah, actually, we only have 2 questions. Our second question: if a person is incarcerated but won an appeal and will be released soon, can that case be expunged?
I want to say the question back to make sure I understand it.
Yeah. So
Someone's incarcerated serving a sentence, but they'll be released soon and wanting to know if that case can be expunged. Is that right?
incarcerated, but won an appeal and will be
Correct.
released soon. Yeah.
So without knowing more details, I don't know the basis for the win or why the appeal was won, but I will just say that once you're done serving a sentence, you are eligible. Retro first offender eligibility is immediate. There's no wait time. So if you have not used your first offender sentence, if for some reason you or your first offender remedy, you weren't advised of first offender, that would be an option. If it's a felony case, I'm assuming if you're serving a sentence, probably that it's a felony conviction, and you're just finishing your sentence, you'll need to wait 5 years if it's still a conviction to apply for a pardon. You would likely be eligible if it's not a serious violent felony or a sex offense. You would be eligible for a pardon. Actually, sex offenses, you can get a pardon. It just can't be restricted and sealed. So pardon and retro first offender are the things that come to mind. Retro first offender, there's no wait time. Pardon, you have to wait 5 years. The appeal question, it just depends. That's very specific. So it sounds like maybe that might be someone that could apply for our services or come through our intake process. We could look more detailed at your record. Should I keep going, Henry?
Those are all the records related questions we have this time.
Great. Okay. So I want to make sure I give Jenny plenty of time. So knowing your rights, we're going to talk housing and employment. I don't know why I read those in reverse order, but switching it up. And then I'm going to kick it over to Jenny to talk about probation and voting, which are, more her area. So we already talked about private background check reports. These are the ones that are pulling from individual court records. So if a court record has not been sealed, that case is going to probably going to show up on a private background check report. So here's what you need to know. Let's say you applied for Uber. This is the most common scenario I see. You've applied for Uber or Lyft. Maybe you've been driving for them for a long time. Things have been going great, but they've really ratcheted up. They've expanded the amount of time that they're looking at for private background checks, and they're digging in more. They're not just looking at felonies, they're looking at any cases. So your background check comes back and there are cases on there. Report for the first thing to look for. Reports are often wrong. They might say something is a felony when it's actually a misdemeanor. They may say something is a felony conviction when it's actually a felony first offender. So the first thing to look is this square with what I remember happened in the case? And if you're not sure, and this can happen, right? Maybe you had 4 convictions in the 90s, you got clean, and you've been doing great since. You don't remember what happened in court in 1999. Like, I wouldn't either. One of the best ways if you have that private background check report, is to go to the court and ask for a copy of your final disposition and compare. So you look at what it says on that background check report for that case, and then look at what the court clerk gives you and make sure they match. If they don't, you have rights. So if they don't match, you can reach out to, so the next bullet here says consumer reporting agencies are governed by the Fair Credit Reporting Act. This is a federal law that gives you rights to make sure that your background check is accurate and that anything that has been sealed is not reported. So I guess the most important things to know are, you have to be told if you're denied a job because of that report. So a lot of times people will get to the end of the application process. Maybe they get the offer and then they say, we're going to run your background. The background gets run, and then you'll get an email that says, we're going to go with another candidate, or you just don't hear back. You have a right to ask for a copy of the report, the adverse action letter, and the printout that they're looking at. And I encourage you to ask. It can be very tempting in these moments to kind of slink away into the hedges, Homer Simpson style. But actually doing that doesn't benefit you because you've already been denied, right? And if you get that report, you have you are empowered to do 2 things. 1, make sure it's right so that it doesn't harm you in the future again if it's inaccurate. And 2, if it's accurate, it lets you know now this is what's hurting me. And when you come to apply for record clearing services with Georgia Justice Project or with the court or with a private attorney, you have evidence that this is hurting you. You can say it's not just, I think I'm not getting jobs because of my record. It's, look, I'm not getting jobs because it says right here, they're not hiring me because of this case. So I encourage you to get a copy of that background check and that report and to ask, even if it's uncomfortable. To dispute anything, you can reach out to whatever the background check company is, checker.com, backgroundchecks.com. They will have a contact. They have to have contact information on their website. You can reach out to them to say, you're reporting inaccurate information. Here's the disposition that I got from the court clerk. These don't line up. You got to fix it. And then the last thing, which is pretty important, so I'll say it twice, there's a 7-year rule. A lot of folks think after 7 years, my background gets deleted. That, unfortunately, that's not true. If you have a conviction, it can be reported forever and ever until it's restricted and sealed. But non-convictions after 7 years may not be reported on a private background check. So if you have a case that's over 7 years old and it's showing, and it was dismissed, or it was a first offender that you completed successfully, it should not be being reported on a private background check, and you have a right to contest that. So again, you would want to go to the court and get a copy of the first offender paperwork or the dismissal and send it to the background check company and say, you're violating the law. You have to take this off my background. And they have to do that or they have legal liability. So that's something to know. Okay. Does the law protect people with a record? The answer is yes and no. Criminal record status is not protected. So things like race, age, disability, marital status, those are protected. You cannot be denied employment because of those reasons. You can, as you know, be denied employment because of your criminal record. However, employer policies have to be narrowly tailored. So they can't just say, we will never look or hire at anybody who's ever been arrested. That is not a lawful policy, and you can file a complaint with the EEOC if that blanket policy exists. There has to be something specifically connecting their rule and the kind of employment that you're looking for. Also, there's some policies that can affect people more, for example, more folks of color or older folks more. And those policies are illegal and they can sometimes come up in record clearing. So, or excuse me, with criminal records. So if you sense that that's actually what's going on, I also encourage you to report the employer. What can they ask you? They can ask about arrests or convictions. There's no time limit about how far back employers can search. So here are my recommendations. Clear whatever you can. Obviously, that's why you're here today. But you want to restrict and seal anything that you can from your record. Never leave questions blank or write, we'll discuss at interview. Many employers treat this as an honesty test. So what will happen is they'll say, have you been convicted of a crime? If you say no and your record comes back, that's it. They don't even want to hear. They're not going to listen after that. If that no doesn't line up with what they see, then that's the end of the process. And so it's important, if the answer is yes, and you know it hasn't been restricted and sealed, to say yes and to give a very brief, only answer the question asked and give a very brief statement. So I'll give an example. Let's say I have a theft conviction from 6 years ago. I stole a bike. Here's an example of what I wouldn't say. Well, first of all, you have to say you have it. If it hasn't been, if you didn't get retro first offender, you have to say I have a theft conviction. What I wouldn't say is my brother was there. It was really his idea to take the bike, and I was just going along for the ride, and it's not really my fault. And you don't want any kind of not taking responsibility for what happened. But what you can say is I have a theft conviction. It's 6 years old. I haven't had anything since, and I'm moving forward with my life. Or maybe I was struggling at the time financially. I'm much more secure now, and nothing like this will happen again. Something very brief. You don't have to go on and on about how you're so sorry, but just something very brief, only answer the question asked. Oh, last thing, focus on jobs that are not related to your charges. So theft and retail is a bad match. If you can't clear your whole theft record, I would recommend, I think you're going to have a difficult time with retail. Construction jobs, truck driving jobs, things like that are going to be a better fit. I don't need to spend much time on this. I don't want to, y'all know this, but have your resume and cover letter updated. You never know who you're going to run into. ever. So if you run into someone, they say, oh, send me your resume. You don't want to have to be panic typing for the next hour trying to get it ready. Make sure you just have it ready. Make sure you have your documents like birth certificate, ID, passport. A lot of times you get to the end of the process, they'll offer you the job and then ask for those documents. That can be, if they need you to start right away, you want to have them ready. Documents related to your case. If you have a first offender case or dismissed cases, if you can go now to the court where those happened, especially if you think that they're coming up on your background, and get your final disposition or get the dismissal paperwork, you'll be so happy you have it. If that background check comes back and you need to talk about it or explain it, just go ahead and have the court paperwork. And then letters of reference. One thing about letters of reference, I will say, if you have someone that knows about your record and is recommending you anyway, that is a great person to have on your team. Someone that can say, yeah, I know he has a felony record. I hired him anyway, and he's the best dang, truck driver I've ever worked with. Whatever, you can have somebody who can really speak on your behalf and say, despite this is the person I know this human to be. They have good character, they show up on time, they do their work.